Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Walt Peretti from New York State Workers' Compensation Board, Advocate for Business Office. We're going to begin now. If you have any questions, just put them in the chat. I should have ample time to get to all of them. So just as you think of them or as they come up during the presentation, just throw them in the chat and then I'll go through them as we end. This is our workers' comp disability benefits requirements for code enforcement officials. So anytime you're issuing any type of permit, license, or contract, whether that's at the county level, city level, what have you, or even New York State. So what is a workers' comp board? We were created in 1914 after the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory that occurred in 1911, where a lot of women and immigrants lost their lives in working in what we would consider sweatshop conditions these days. The board was created to oversee workers' compensation, disability benefits, and most recently, New York State paid family leave. We receive reports of all injuries and accidents that happen on the job, as well as payments, and we authorize healthcare providers to treat workers' compensation insurance claimants. We have approximately 1,050 employees, and our offices are scattered throughout New York State. We're here in the Schenectady office today. We have offices downstate, Buffalo, up in the North Country, etc. If there's any issue as far as whether a claim is compensable or not, we would hold a hearing and we would adjudicate those disputes between the injured worker, the insurance carrier, and the employer. Okay. Our office, specifically the Advocate for Business Office, our advocate is Anthony Tomaselli. We assist individual businesses with coverage and compliance problems. We work to educate business owners as well as government personnel in the workers' compensation system. And we regularly, travel throughout the state to meet with business associations, employer groups, to listen to their concerns regarding the system. We report directly to our chairperson, Frida Foster. So if we hear a common theme or a common issue as to how we can make the system better for both the businesses as well as the injured workers, we can bring those concerns right back to Frida for possible legislation or change results. Okay. So Section 57 of the Workers' Compensation Law and Section 220 of the Disability Benefits Law essentially says that no permit, license, or contract shall be issued without the proper proof of workers' compensation, disability benefits, as well as paid family leave, or the certificate of attestation, CE 200, attesting to the fact that a business is exempt from carrying those benefits. Right. So what is workers' compensation insurance? It covers all on-the-job injuries, illnesses, and accidents, provides both medical and wage replacement, and it's there to both protect the employers as well as the employees. Okay. Disability benefits covers anything that happens off the job. So if you go home tonight, you're raking leaves and you pull your back out or throw your back out, that would be covered under disability benefits. You must be under the care of a physician or a healthcare professional. There's only limited wage replacement. If you're injured off the job, it's it's $170 a week for up to a 26-week period. And you have to file that claim within 30 days of becoming disabled. Okay. And then paid family leave. That provides New York paid time off to bond with a child, whether that's a birth, adoption, or foster care, to care for a sick family member that has a serious health condition, or to assist a family member if they are deployed abroad on active military duty. Okay, so who needs coverage and who doesn't need coverage? Right? Essentially, businesses with employees need workers' compensation insurance coverage from day one. All right. So from the moment they open that business, they hire that first employee or bring on that first employee, where that individual is full-time, part-time, a family member, etc. They need to have a policy in place. And then with the disability benefits, you have 4 weeks after their 30th day of employment to get the coverage. So you have approximately 2 months to secure that disability and paid family leave insurance. Whereas on the workers' comp side, you have to have that right from the get-go. Okay. So how do we define an employee? It's anyone that's providing services to a for-profit business can be determined to be an employee of that business. We don't look at whether that individual is paid or not. If it's a for-profit business and they're assisting, generally they're going to be considered an employee of that business for workers' compensation purposes. And again, we don't look at the way they're paid, whether you issue that individual W-2, you pay them on a 1099, you pay them under the table, what have you. We would, if they're assisting in that business, generally they're going to be determined to be an employee of that business. And then any compensated individual that's providing services to a non-for-profit. can be determined to be an employee of that not-for-profit, okay, with the exception of clergy and teachers in a 501c3 situation. So even if if it's a non-for-profit and they have paid individuals, they would need coverage. If it's more clergy or teaching situation, they wouldn't. So it could be in a situation where, if it's a church or a place of worship, the clergy, there would not need to be coverage. But if you had people who are paid to pick up after mass or do general maintenance in and around, the house of worship, you would need to have that coverage. So who's not required to carry coverage? In all these instances, these individuals or persons are not required to have the coverage, but they can always go out and get themselves a policy. So if you're a sole proprietor, you don't have any employees, you're one man, one woman operation, you don't have any employees aside from yourself, you don't have to have coverage. If you're a partner in a partnership that has no employees, you would also be exempt. And then a 1 or 2 person owned corporation that has no employees are exempt. The caveat with a 2 person owned corporation is each individual has to hold at least 1 share of stock in 1 office, and between the 2 individuals, they have to hold all the stock in all the offices. So if you have a 3-person corporation, a president, secretary, treasurer, that business would need to have coverage. One of those individuals would be considered to be an employee under the workers' comp law. If you're an LLC and you only have people that are compensated that are members of that LLC, you would not need to have coverage as well. So it's basically, do you want to take that risk? You can't take that risk if you have an employee for not providing coverage. But if you're a sole proprietor and you say, you know what, I'm not going to be injured on the job. If I am, I'll just fight through it. I'll continue working, etc. You can take that risk as a business owner or partner in the business, but you can't, if you have employees, you can't take that risk for them. Some of the coverage issues we run across, and we'll go through a few of these. Independent contractors, subcontractors, coming up, there's a test as to who's an independent contractor, who's actually an employee. Family members, they're considered employees, okay? So if they're helping in the business, a lot of people, they'll put their son or daughter on to give them health insurance through their business. Those individuals would be considered to be employees for workers' comp purposes, whether you're paying them or not paying them. Domestic employees, if you have a nanny, etc., you're going to need coverage, all right? Borrowed employees, each business has to have their own coverage under their own FEIN number. So if you own 2 businesses, with employees, you'd need to have a separate policy for each business. The carrier can put both entities on the same policy as long as there's common majority ownership, but they would list both FEINs on that policy. And then also on your homeowner's policy, there's a workers' compensation insurance rider, and that's just there to cover casual employment in and around your house. So, maybe the person that shovels your driveway or does your lawn, nobody's going to say they're actually your employee, but there is some coverage there if they were to be hurt on the job when they were working at your house. If you have leased employees, you can get that coverage through a PEO for professional employer organization, where the employees are actually considered to be employees of that PEO. Then you would get the policy under the name of that PEO, listing your business as well, an FEIN number. Out-of-state employers, if you're sending employees into New York State, you need to have New York coverage, all right? Your Connecticut policy is not going to cover you. We'll go through that in a few slides as how you can make that work, though, and how you can amend that out-of-state policy to include New York State. Religious organizations, religion is not a reason for exemption. So whether, if it's Amish, Mennonites, Jehovah's Witness, etc., if they're performing work, they need to have coverage, okay? Student interns are also considered to be employees. They're getting something of value, whether or not they're paid or not. If you have a student intern in your office or accounting firm, law firm, what have you, maybe over the summer months, that individual would need to. And then temp service agencies, if you're going, to a labor ready or someplace like that where you're getting a few employees for a few days, those individuals are considered to be employees of that temp service agency. So it could be in a situation where you wouldn't need coverage as a sole proprietor if you were getting your employees from a temp service agency. And then again, volunteers in a for-profit business would be considered to be employees of that business, so you would need coverage. Okay. General contractors, okay, under the law, they're going to be liable for any workers' compensation claims of any uninsured subcontractor they hire. So we always recommend, we give this presentation a lot to building groups, construction groups, etc. that anybody they hire, in terms of subcontractors, that they make sure that subcontractor has their own policy. And they also add the general contractor as a certificate holder on that policy. And what that does is once you're named that certificate holder, should anything change with that policy, you'll be notified from the insurance carrier. So if you hired me as a subcontractor and I didn't pay my premium, you would be notified, through mail by the insurance carrier that, hey, Walt Peretti hasn't paid his premium. We're going to cancel him as of November 5th. And then you can follow up with that subcontractor as far as, hey, what's going on with this policy? You need to pay the premium to keep it active. So as a general contractor, you want to be sure that anybody you hire has a policy in their own name and FEIN number, and that you get the insurance certificate from that individual. Okay. The Construction Industry Fair Play Act, that's to determine if a worker is an employee or independent. There's three criteria they must meet. And it also determines when a sole proprietor, partnership, or corporation or other entity will be considered to be a separate business entity from the contractor. And that's a 12 criteria test. And you have to meet all of those. Okay. So it's not if you make 2 out of 3 or, 10 out of 12, you're considered to be, you're considered to pass that. You have to meet all 12 or all 3, that you're a separate business entity. So the three criteria are you're free from direction and control. Okay. So you can kind of show up when you want to the job site, do the job when you want to do it. You're performing services outside the usual course of business for that particular employer. So if the employer is a general contractor, you're doing the framing, that's a different trade or skill set, or if you're doing masonry work for that individual. But if you're a roofer and you're hiring a laborer to help you bring the shingles up on the roof or take the roof off, etc., that individual will be considered your employee. They're doing roofing services. You're a roofer. They're engaged in that same course of business that you are. So that's not a separate trade. Okay. And then to be considered an independent contractor, you must meet all 12. Again, you're free from direction and control. Okay. You're not to be subject to cancellation when the work with that contractor ends. You have a substantial investment in the capital in the entity. So you have your tools, your own equipment, maybe your own personal vehicle that you drive to and from the job site. You're not using the general contractor's tools and equipment, etc. You own all those capital goods. You gain your own profit or loss based on how well your business does. You make your services available to the general public or community. You're just not working for that same contractor over and over. You file your own income taxes under your own FEIN number, and you perform the services under your entity's name. So we ran into this a bunch of years back with some of the big box stores like Lowe's and Home Depot. When you go in to buy windows, they say they have an authorized installer for those windows or your hot water tank, etc. But they actually, if they're performing services under that Home Depot umbrella, then they would be considered employees of Home Depot for that particular job. And do you obtain and pay for any required license or permit in the entity's name? So if you need if you need a electrical permit, you get that in your own name and not the name of that general contractor. Again, do you bring your own tools? Do you hire your own employees without the contractor approval, and without reimbursement from that contractor? And you report those employees' income to the Internal Revenue Service, the IRS? Do you have the right to perform similar services for other businesses or individuals, whenever you choose? And again, do you represent the entity or the employees of the entity as your own employees to your customers? Okay, so you'd have to meet all 12 of those to be a separate business entity and not be considered an employee of that hiring business. Okay. As far as out of state, we talked briefly about that, how you need New York State coverage if you're working in New York State or sending employees into New York State. Again, that's day one. So if they're coming into New York for a small project, you would need a full New York workers' compensation insurance. And there's 2 ways to do that. You can go. We have about 240 licensed carriers in New York State. There's also New York State Insurance Fund that's licensed just to provide workers' comp, disability benefits, and paid family leave insurances. So you could go to the state fund, get a New York policy, or if you're a carrier, you're an out-of-state entity, maybe from Massachusetts, Connecticut, etc., and you have one of those 240 carriers that I said were licensed right in New York State. If you went to them, they would add New York in section 3A of your out-of-state policy. And that would give you full New York benefits. It's basically the insurance carrier saying, like, we know that you have employees working in New York State, and you're sending those employees to New York State. Should those individuals be injured on the job, that the carrier will pay New York benefits. So, and that's important, because if you're working in New York State and you're injured here, through the course of that employment, you're entitled to receive New York level benefits. Proof of workers' compensation insurance. Okay, so this is anytime you're issuing any type of permit, license, or contract, all right, whether that's again at the town level, village, county, New York State, etc. You need to collect proof of workers' compensation insurance or proof of exemption. So for workers' comp, the New York State, it's a certificate of New York State workers' compensation insurance. Okay, that's form C-105.2. The New York State Insurance Fund uses form U-26.3. These forms are issued, they're a controlled form. They're issued by each carrier themselves or the licensed agent. Okay, so if you have an agent, you work through an agent, you could go to that individual. They can actually, the carriers and the insurance agent can request a blank certificate through our office. But generally they will have those. If you're with the New York State Insurance Fund, they use form U-26.3. It's the same exact form, and we have screenshots of those forms coming up in the next couple slides. And through the New York State Insurance Fund, I know that you can download that as the customer, as the insured. You can go online and download that right from their website if you log into your account. If you're a member of self-insurance, if you're not insured either with the New York State Insurance Fund or a private carrier, you're self-insured. That would be form SI-12. That's also available from the self-insurance office here at the New York State Workers' Compensation Board. Self-insurance is mostly larger entities. So you want to think about like Wegmans, locally around Albany Capital District. It's Price Chopper, FedEx, UPS, they're self-insured. So sometimes some of those bigger entities, they apply to our self-insurance office, they put up a large bond, and they pay the claims. So as a worker, as an employee in New York State, it doesn't matter who you're covered by, whether you're covered by a policy under the Travelers, the State Fund, or your employer is self-insured, the benefits are the same. So you're entitled to those statutory benefits regardless of who your carrier is. And then the CE 200, which is this long name, certificate of attestation for exemption. And that's the business attesting to the fact that they do not require compensation, insurance, and or disability benefits, paid family leave coverage. Okay. That's an online form. That form has to be submitted and collected by the code enforcement official for every permit they issue. So if it's the same entity and they're applying for a permit 1 week, they would submit the CE 200. They come in 2 weeks later, they have another job in your municipality, they would have to submit a new CE 200. That form is available. It's an online form. You go in, it takes about 7 to 10 minutes to fill it out online. It's located at businessexpress.ny.gov. And you fill it out. You get a link with the form, you print it, sign it, date it, and then you would give it to that building official for them to issue that. Also, we had form BP1. Okay, that went away about almost coming up on 8 years now. All those reasons for exemption on the BP1 have been moved over to that CE 200, including if you're a homeowner. So if you're a homeowner applying for some type of building permit around your house, the BP1 is no longer a valid form to submit as proof of exemption. You would go over to that CE 200 and print that out, and as either a homeowner or a business that is exempt. And that's a certified affidavit. You're certifying to one of the exemption reasons that are listed as to you fill that out under penalty of perjury. So make sure you read through those exemptions. If you're filling one out, you select the one that meets your business, or you as a sole proprietor. And if you don't see one on there, generally you're probably not exempt from having workers' comp and or leave coverage. Okay. So what is the legal name of an employer and why is it important? Each business that's using employees must have their own workers' compensation insurance in their own legal name and FEIN number. So as that individual comes in and is looking for that building permit or restaurant permit, food service permit, etc., you want to make sure that they give you the insurance information or the CE 200, the exemption form, in the same name and FEIN number that they want on the building permit or whatever permit they're applying for. And again, if one policy can insure many legal entities, as long as there's common majority ownership amongst those entities. The carrier can list each of those FEIN numbers. So if it's a situation where it is a larger business with several subsidiaries, you want to make sure that the name and FEIN number that you're putting on the permit is on that insurance certificate. So they might list several of those on there. Just make sure you scroll down and find the one that matches what's going on the permit. And it's identical to the name and the legal entity. The address isn't as important, but just the name and FEIN number or tax ID number is what you really want to pay attention to. Okay. Here's a picture of that C-105.2. If you look up in that upper left-hand box with the red oval on it, you want to verify that the legal name is listed in box 1A and that matches the permit applicant. The certificate holders in box 2, and that's going to be the name and address of that agency that's issuing the license or permit. Or it can even be the certificate holders we talked about previously, where you're that general contractor and you're hiring a subcontractor and they're giving you a copy of your permit. You can be listed as that that certificate holder in box 2. And again, the certificates, they're obtained by either the insurance agent or the insurance carrier. Okay, so you as the applicant can go to, if you used an insurance agent to procure your policy, you could go to that agent and get the policy or get the certificate, or you can go directly to your insurance carrier and they can issue you that certificate of insurance. This is a picture of the U-26.3. Again, this is this New York State Insurance Fund's version of the C-105.2. It has the same exact information on it. It just looks a little bit different. And that's the form that they issue. Again, if you are insured with the state fund, you can go online, log into your account, and you'll be able to print this certificate out as needed. So you would fill out that information online. You could also, you could call them as well, and I'm sure they would fill it out and email it to you or send it to you. And again, that box 1A, you want to make sure that matches the permit applicant. The certificate holder should be the name and address of the agency that's issuing that license or permit or contract. And you can obtain those through the New York State Insurance Fund, either online or by calling them. Okay. The Accord form, which you're seeing right now on this slide, is not acceptable proof of workers' compensation insurance. Only the certificate of insurance is acceptable. The Accord form is more certificate of liability insurance. There is a section there for workers' comp, but it's more of a it's not the actual certificate, and it doesn't make the certificate holder will not be notified in the same way you would if you were a certificate holder on that certificate of insurance of workers' comp insurance, the C-105.2 or the U-26.3. Right. The CE 200, which is that exemption form, you can again obtain that through businessexpress.ny.gov. On their homepage, you can either click certificate of CE 200 right under top requests, right in that search bar there. And you can also access that right through the board's website. It's just an extra step there, wcb.ny.gov/CE.200. Again, that's an online form. You go on there, you fill it out. Once you create your own GovID and password, the next time you go on to fill out a CE 200, a lot of that information in terms of your name and address, that'll backfill in there. So you're not starting from scratch all over again. And there's you can have a situation where an entity might be exempt from disability benefits, paid family leave, but require workers' compensation insurance. So they could submit the C-105.2 or the certificate of insurance for workers' comp, but then they could give you that CE 200 for disability benefits. Okay. As we talked about, workers' compensation is a day one insurance. So it could be something where they're entering New York State to do some work and they need to have a New York policy, but they're going to be in New York State for less than 30 days in the calendar year. It's a smaller job. Maybe they're putting a deck on, et cetera. Maybe they're just even delivering and dropping off some materials. So they're not going to have employees in New York for more than 30 days in a calendar year. So they'd give you that workers' compensation insurance certificate, and then they could give you that exemption form for the CE 200. Okay. And basically it's the applicant is certifying that they're not required to have workers' compensation. And again, note that the CE 200, you want to collect that for permit, license, or application. If they are if asking you to issue a new permit or another permit, for a different job, etc., you would need to collect another CE 200. It's, you can't collect one for the whole year. Whereas on the C 105.2 and the U 26.3, the actual certificate of insurance, it'll show the policy date. So, as a code enforcement official or the town official, etc., if that individual is going to be coming into your municipality and, installing pools all summer, and they have a policy that shows they're good from like 11/1 of 2025 through 10/31 of 2026, you can collect that one certificate and photocopy that, put that in the next file, as long as the work is going to be done within that policy period. Whereas the CE 200, you want to collect a new CE 200 form every time that individual needs a new permit, license, or contract. Okay, here's with the CE 200, a screenshot of that on the right. Again, you just want to verify the legal name of the entity matches the name on the permit applicant. That business applying for must list the name of the agency issuing the license, permit, or contract. And then again, you want to verify that the location work matches the address on the permit application. And the individual submitting that will sign and date that. So make sure they do go ahead and sign and date it. And there's a certificate number on the bottom. If you ever have any questions as to the validity of those, again, it's a legal affidavit. Individuals are filling it out under penalty of perjury, but if you have questions as to it and you think they might not be exempt or what have you, you can always call our office. Or if the individual, the entity, they don't believe something you're telling them, they have their brother working with them, and you're telling them they need the coverage in place, you please refer them to us. We'll be happy, to walk them through it, explain to them why they need the coverage or they don't need the coverage, and how to go about getting it if they need it. That's a lot of what our office does is customer service. We're a smaller office. There's about 5 of us there, and somebody, if you call during business hours, you're gonna get an individual on the phone that'll be able to answer your question or assist with your issue. So please always feel free, whether it's, questions on CE 200 or what have you, please feel free to reach out to our office. And again, for the proof of disability benefits, again, you want to collect that certificate. It's form DB 120.1 on the disability benefits paid family leave. Both the New York State Insurance Fund as well as the private carriers use the same form, so there's no separate form that you might receive from the state insurance fund. And then if they are self-insured, it'd be form DB 155, and again the exemption form, if they were exempt from disability benefits paid family leave, they would file that CE 200. Okay. Here's a copy on your screen on the slide here of the DB 120.1. Again, box 1A, you want to make sure that it matches what's going on that permit, license, or contract. And then the certificate holder should be the name and address of the agency that's issuing the permit. So if it's, the Schenectady County or City of Buffalo, etc., that would be in box 2. And those certificates, again, are obtained by the licensed agent or their insurance carrier of the insured. Okay. Some of the penalties for workers' compensation, non-compliance. So if you don't have coverage, it can be up to $2,000 for every 10 days out of compliance, or $72,000 a year approximately. If you have up to 5 uninsured employees, it's also a misdemeanor, subject to a $5,000 penalty, maximum $5,000 penalty. More than 5 employees can be a Class E felony, subject to a maximum of $50,000 penalty, as well as 1 1/3 to 4 years in prison. And misclassification is the same as being uninsured. So what misclassification is, if you're doing roofing and you report like your payroll to your carrier based on the job type, so and you try to hide that and misclassify, that roofing payroll as administrative payroll, something that's obviously going to provide you with a lesser premium, because on the administrative side, there's a lot less risk of injury than somebody that's up on a roof, and climbing a ladder and carrying bundles of shingles, et cetera, as being uninsured. So generally, your insurance carrier will make sure that your employees and your payroll is classified correctly. If you think it is not being classified correctly, you can always, there's a 4-digit code that goes along with every job in New York State. You can always talk to your carrier or your agent. If your business has changed a little bit, or you've mended it, or maybe you're going in a new direction, or maybe it was a little bit more automated and less, you got away from some of the labor side and automated some of your processes, you want to discuss that with them, as far as like checking out your classification codes that are being used and applied, because that's how your premium is largely determined. Okay. Also, if you're found to not have workers' compensation insurance coverage under Section 141 of workers' comp law, you're barred from bidding on any type of public work contract or subcontract with the state or any municipal corporation. Okay. And that's for a 1-year period. And that's very important. So you want to make sure that if you need the insurance, you keep that insurance up to date, because it will affect for a 1-year period your ability to receive any type of permit, license, or contract at any government level. So whether that's, locally with the MTA, New York City schools, city, town, et cetera, you go on that debarment list and you cannot receive any type of permit, license, or contract. As far as those penalties go, if you are found to be out of compliance, okay, and you get a letter from us and you have a fine, please reach out. You can reach directly out to our office at the end of the presentation with our email address as well as our phone number. And we will work to get you into compliance. And then once you get the policy you need and you're in compliance, you can send us a copy of that policy showing the premium, and we'll work to lower that fine as best we can. We don't want to charge, a small mom and pop operation $2,000, for being on a compliance for 10, 11 days if, the total annual premium was $1,500. So what our office and our compliance unit will do is they look at the amount of premium you're paying, look at the lapse, hopefully you didn't have any uninsured claims while you didn't have coverage, and then they'll work on mitigating that penalty as best that they can. Some of the other non-compliance penalties of board issues, stop work orders. They'll do this if they find a business that doesn't have workers' compensation insurance coverage, and they should have it. Our investigators will issue a stop work order, and then you cannot open that business until you go out and get the required policy and prove that you are in compliance with workers' comp disability benefits insurance. You're also barred from bidding on any types of public works projects. And then it's important to note, if you're an officer in a corporation, you can be directly sued and you're personally liable for any claims that occur while you are uninsured. So if you're a sole proprietor, you're a partner in a business, president, treasurer, secretary, et cetera, you want to make sure that business, if they need the coverage, they have that coverage in place, because you can be personally liable for those claims. And, nobody needs to lecture you on the cost of medical care these days. If you had some type of uninsured claim, that can run up into the thousands and tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars. So just, do your best to make sure you're in compliance, you have the coverage that you need, and you pay your premium invoice in a timely manner to keep that continuous coverage. Here's the board's website, a few areas of interest here. You can go where that little magnifying glass is. Does employer have coverage? If you wanted to look up, that entity that just gave you the certificate, or maybe you're getting some work done on your own house, and they say fully insured on the truck sitting outside. You want to make sure that individual has coverage, because he knows he or she is going to be bringing their employees into your home to renovate your kitchen or what have you. You can go on that, and you can see if that entity is in fact insured. Okay. If you clicked on that, you'd get this screen. And then you go down to the lower part of the screen, search for employer coverage, and it would pop up there. There's also the whistleblower form CE 150. It's to notify the board when an issue is found at the job site, such as a business operating with employees after they already submitted that CE 200. And it automatically goes, if you submit this online, it automatically goes sends that complaint right to the proper district for handling. So if you file that out in Buffalo, it'll go to our Buffalo district office. You file it here, locally in the Capital District, come through our Schenectady office, and an investigator will look at that and follow up with that entity. It's an anonymous form, so you don't have to fill in your information. You can if you want, but you can also fill it out anonymously if you choose. Here's that employer coverage search. This we put in Proctor's Art Center, which is just up the street from our Schenectady office. It comes back with, anything named Proctor's in New York State. You go to that, and then you can see that they had a policy in 7/1/2024 was the effective date, no end date. Generally, 99% of the time, workers' compensation policies are written for 1 year period. So, you would slides a few months old, you'd see an end date of 7/1/2025, and then hopefully they have a new policy that started 7/1/2025 to 7/1/2026. But as long as you don't see that end date, they are insured for workers' comp right there, and then you can kind of see the coverage history. You actually see a lot of the same information that we can view on our own internal compliance system. So it's a good tool to have at your disposal, whether you're using it on your daily work or you use it on a personal level if you're hiring a contractor or somebody to work around your house. Okay. So again, for workers' compensation, you want to make sure they only submit the approved forms. So again, the C-105.2 if it's a private carrier, the U-26.3 if they're insured through the New York State Insurance Fund, or that SI-12 or GSI 105.2 if they have some type of self-insurance. Make sure that legal name on the insurance documentation on the certificate matches the legal name and an FEIN number, EIN number that's going on that permit license or contract. You want to make sure the FEIN on the approved form matches the FEIN on that permit as well. And once those two things match up, should be good. And the same with that CE 200. Make sure those fields match up. Again, the board, we have social media channels, Twitter, or formerly known as Twitter, now known as X. And you can follow us there. We have a Facebook page as well as Instagram. We have a YouTube channel where you can go and listen to this presentation. And as well as other presentations we provide. We do some monthly lunch and learns, both on the Advocate for Business side, as well as our Advocate for Injured Workers. So those presentations are available on our YouTube channel. You can follow us on LinkedIn, and you can sign up for email notifications. If you go on there, you want to receive notification about stuff, on code enforcement, you can do that, or injured worker, insurance carrier news. You can select exactly the type of communications you would want to get from us. Again, our office, leave the slide up for a bit. Advocate for Business office led by our advocate Anthony Tomaselli. Our direct line comes right, again, there's 5 of us in the office, comes right to one of us, 581 or 518-486-3331. If you call during business hours, 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Monday through Friday, there'll be somebody there to pick it up. If you ever need to email us, it's just advocatebusiness@wcb.ny.gov. We also have our own section of the website where a lot of this information is available, wcb.ny.gov/AFB. If you wanted a copy of this presentation, if you email us after, we will send you a copy of the slide deck, for you to have. Right now, I'm just going to take a quick break. There's some questions in the chat, and I'll come back and I'll be able to answer those in a moment. Okay, so there's a couple questions here. Can the CE 200 replace either WC or disability for out-of-state contracts? I'll be working in New York for less than 30 days. That's a good question. So again, workers' compensation in New York State is a day one insurance. So if that individual, that out-of-state contract or out-of-state entity is coming into New York State, they would not be eligible. If they're sending employees in New York State, they would not be eligible for an exemption for that CE 200 for workers' comp. But if it is going to be less than 30 days, they could get the CE 200 for the disability benefits paid family leave. Okay, so it can't replace both. But if they're going to be if they're sending employees into New York State for for one day even, or half a day, whatever the period may be. We have a lot of state contracts we get where, they're coming in and they're delivering some equipment and they're setting it up, but it's only going to be an afternoon. They would still need that workers' comp. They would still need a New York workers' comp policy. But they can fill out the CE 200 for the disability benefits, okay? That's so that they would qualify, just for the disability benefits, paid family leave there. And then there's another question here. What requirements do Amish contractors need to provide? Normally a CE 200, does each employee have to have a CE 200 if they're family, do they? So this is one we get a lot, especially obviously in the building trades. And back to one of our earlier slides, religious organizations aren't exempt from having New York State workers' compensation, disability benefits / paid family leave insurance, based on their religious affiliation, whether that's the Amish, Mennonites, Jehovah's Witnesses, et cetera. Okay. They would need to have coverage in place. So you can't waive your right to coverage. So if you're the same family, and you're doing work, you're building a barn, or et cetera, you're getting a permit, they would need to have coverage, like all 5 members of that family or 2 members, they can't each individually fill out a CE 200. Okay. If they were an LLC or they met one of the exemptions on that CE 200 form, they could be exempt. So if that individual is a sole proprietor, he didn't have any family members or subcontractors or friends or neighbors working with him, then, or him or her, then they would be exempt from having the coverage. They could fill out the CE 200. But just the fact that that individual is a member of a religious group, Amish, Mennonites, et cetera, does not make them exempt. So you want to really make sure that if they're going to be using employees, if they're coming in to build a barn or put a roof on or whatever it might be, and they need that building, they have coverage unless they meet one of those exemption form, one of those reasons listed on that CE 200. So generally, I would say in most instances, they're going to need coverage. So you really want to be careful. Family members, again, are considered to be employees, whether they're getting paid or not. So, if the family comes in and they're putting up that barn, all 3, 4, 5 of them cannot hand you a CE 200. Okay. Somebody is the employer there, and in which case they would need workers' compensation insurance.